This is the SAU Report, a program featuring interviews with the faculty, staff, students, and alumni of Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.
Welcome to this special Campaign 98 edition of the SAU Report. I'm Dana Thomas.
And I'm Amanda Black. With us today is a very special guest, Judy Smith, the United States House of Representatives candidate, and she's a Democrat, a state representative. She's also the executive director of a substance abuse and prevention program located in Camden. Welcome, Ms. Smith.
Thank you so much. I am very pleased to be here on SAU's campus. The reception is always so kind.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Yes, I'm glad to be
Thank
here.
you.
And of course, being with young people is absolutely one of the things that I love to do. Yes.
Well, if we could, let's talk a little bit about the 4th District. It's a roughly 26, 27 counties in the 4th District, I believe. And according to a recent Cook political report, the district is 61.7% Democratic. Yet
Yes.
the Republican candidate and current state representative Jay Dickey's been returned to the post 3 times. How are you going to work to bring back the Democratic vote?
Oh, that is such a great question. Thank you, Amanda. I want you to know, yes, the district has 26 counties. And when I visit every one of those counties, and you'd be happy to know, in October, it only took me 14 days to travel each of the 26 counties, 5 of them twice. Every single courthouse of the 26 counties is dominated, first of all, by Democrats. So Mr. Cook is absolutely right. This is a district that is 61.7 Democratic performance. What that means for me is obviously a lot of work, which I am more than willing to do, as evidenced by my announcement tour in October, which has been dubbed a whirlwind tour. And we did it hurriedly, yet we met thousands and thousands of people. We shook a lot of hands. I saw a lot of old friends and made some new ones, obviously. And I believe my strategy has to be a grassroots campaign. Absolutely, unquestionably. But the other part of my strategy, which is so important, is to help the people of the 4th understand that it is very important who we send to represent us in the U.S. House of Representatives. And we must base that decision on how we believe the person has represented us as indicated by their votes, or how we believe a person will represent us based on the principles and the values that they represent. So what I've got to do is to help the people of the 4th understand that the most important thing in America right now, the most important thing in the district is education and the children of this district. And obviously, we are now represented by someone who doesn't have a very good record with regards to education, because we're talking about a representative who has supported the private school vouchers and has justified the private school voucher vote by saying that he was concerned about the children in Washington, D.C. Well, I believe that we're all concerned about the children in Washington, D.C., but this is not Washington, D.C. This is rural Arkansas, a district that has a number of counties with no private schools, a district that has more people relying on Social Security only as a means of income than most other districts, a state that has the largest number of people relying on Social Security only than any other state.
Okay.
Well, Ms. Smith, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you came from, and just a little bit of how you overcame in poverty as a child?
Yes. Actually, I moved here in 1979, although I like to tell people that I've been connected to Arkansas since 1974 when I met and married my husband, and which will actually be 24 years this year. And we moved back to Arkansas in 1979, and in 1990, I decided that it was part of my purpose for being to run for a seat in the State House of Representatives, Dana. And in spite of the fact that every single expert told me directly not just told other people, but told me that I could not win, that it could not be done because I didn't have the money, I didn't have the experience, and I didn't have the time because I only decided 7 weeks prior to Election Day. And I was able to recruit a large number of volunteers. I was able to get the money generated necessary to at least file for the position by the Tuesday. And we filed, worked really hard, and in spite of what every expert said, I really believed that it was part of God's plan for me to see this as an opportunity to try to help make life better for children, life better for working people, life better for senior citizens. And within that 7 weeks, we raised only $7,000, and yet I unseated a 24-year incumbent. And the way that I got myself from poverty, as you framed the question, is the only way that any American child can expect to do it, because there is only one key that opens up the door from poverty into a world of opportunity, and that key is the key of education. And that is why I work so hard every chance that I get to create opportunities for quality education for all children. You know, some people, and I told you today we're talking about welfare reform, and I placed an amendment on the welfare reform bill for Arkansas that gives an opportunity for moms or dads who are on welfare to go either to a 2-year institution of learning or 4-year education of higher learning like this one. Because the only way we break that cycle from poverty or from welfare is to have education there and available to all children. And that's how I was able to go from growing up very, very poor on the sharecroppers farm to being not only a state legislator, but as the Democrat Gazette said, one of the top 10 legislators, and lots of other accolades.
Yes, ma'am.
We know that there are many more women that are now going into public service, and we've had a Willie Oates, we've had a Hattie Caraway, we've had a Judy Smith, and I wonder though, in the 4th District, if race and gender are going to be something that you're going to need to overcome, because I believe it's 37 to 40% of the white vote that's going to need to be ascertained to send you to Washington. And what are you going to do to maybe go past some of those, what many might perceive as boundaries?
Well, that's exactly one of the same boundaries that was perceived for me in 1990. Because the district was not one of those super majority-minority districts, absolutely not. But the issues of today cross racial boundaries and gender boundaries. There are no boundaries when it comes to educating children, when it comes to providing opportunities for children to enjoy the American dream no matter where they come from, no matter how bad their life circumstances may be. When it comes to people relying on Social Security for their only means of income, that has nothing to do with your race or your gender. And the issues of today, I'm so happy that they are finally what Americans are concerned about, because they're the issues, Amanda, that I have worked on all of my life. And I'm so pleased that as I am the Democratic nominee for United States Congress in this 4th District, that I did not have to wait on any poll to realize the importance of education, protecting children, the importance of protecting Social Security, protecting Medicare, the importance of home health care for our seniors so that they might enjoy a quality of life in their own home, in their own community.
Well, Ms. Smith, I know we have tried to fight drugs in this area and in America for many years now. What do you plan to do to keep fighting the war on drugs?
Well, the number one thing that I plan to do, which would be contrary from my opponent. He voted to eliminate the funding for safe schools and drug-free communities, which is known as the Safe Schools and Drug-Free Communities Act. The number one thing that I want to do certainly is not to propose that we increase that funding, but that we at a minimum retain the level of funding that the federal government now provides to our schools. Because when I talk to the students and when I try to assess a service like that, I think it's better to ask the students than it is to ask the administrators if they believe that those activities work. And when you visit a school, Dana, and I know it hasn't been that long since you were at one, that you find out from the student body, do they really believe in the activities that are being provided by their school? And students overwhelmingly respond, yes, they do.
Yes.
And these kinds of activities do not deter every single child or student, but they do deter too many for us not to continue supporting that kind of activity. But the other thing that I would propose that we do different with the same level of funding is to enhance or increase the curriculum so that we might incorporate violence prevention activities.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I don't think we need new monies, but I think that our schools need to begin to understand that it's all interrelated, so that the curriculum needs to be all inclusive of issues like substance abuse and violence. Don't you think so?
I think so.
Well, we talked a little bit about the funding for these particular programs, which would be incorporated into the public schools across the nation. And you touched on school vouchers. And that may be something that we need to discuss with the opponents of school vouchers. Say it's going to sap resources for our public schools. And proponents say, no, the only school that should be concerned is the bad school. What are your thoughts a little bit about that? You've touched on it briefly, if you might expand.
Well, I think it's very important that we look at that issue specifically with relation to this district, because, Amanda, when I visited those 26 counties, I started asking, how many private schools do you have? And too many counties told me that they had 0 private schools. So for a county like Grant County, a county like Hot Spring County, who have told me that they have none, a voucher would be meaningless pieces of paper for those parents. So I think that what those communities need us to be doing is to figure out a way by which we reduce the classroom sizes for the primary grades, a way to provide some resources so that they can better develop their infrastructure system, so that the environments that we're providing for our children's education are more conducive to learning. And I think that if we continue to send a person to represent us in Congress who does not ask the questions of these communities about where these children would take these vouchers, well, then we're fooling ourselves. I think it's very important that we send someone like myself to the U.S. Congress who will, yes, visit the communities, but will take a look and make an assessment and listen to what the people are saying and ask the people the questions that would help them to be able to respond in a way by which it's more realistic what we support. To just say that you support the private school vouchers because the children in D.C. were in a mess does not justify a congressperson who's representing this district making such a vote. When you walk not only into those 2 counties that I named, but the countless communities that I visited, and I ask, where are your private schools? And they'd say, what private schools? They don't have any. When you go to Wabaseka, they have no private school. And so you talk about parents as well who not only not have a private school in their county or in their community, they don't have a job by which they have the flexibility to take their children to another county or community. But not only do they not have a job with the flexibility, some of them don't have the transportation necessary. And some of us who do have the transportation and a job don't have the time. And that's not to say that our children are not important, because our children's education are always number one. I have yet to meet a parent or a family who does not regard their children's education as vitally important.
Well, Ms. Smith, still talking about children, I know we've had a lot of school shootings in the past year or more, and I know there are a lot of children right now that are being in question of being tried as adults. Do you have anything about a set age that you think children should be tried as adults, or do you think they should set rules?
Well, see, I really believe that some decisions must be left within the discretion of the judicial system. And I really believe that should Arkansas have an open-ended law passed, certainly we know that in Arkansas they will be talking about such measures in 1999. I really believe that they should slow down a little bit and be cautioned, and at a maximum give the discretion to the prosecutor along with the juvenile judges. I don't believe that a legislative body should just generally make a decision that will impact all future incidents based on one of the most horrific incidents in our memories.
Right, yes, ma'am.
We've talked a lot about education, but some of the other things that you're going to be looking at if elected will be maybe attracting business investments to our state, working on the infrastructure. What would be some of your vision for working on economic investment in the state and working on helping heal our highway system?
Yes. Well, that's a very good question. However, as you know, it is one that has provoked a lot of discussion across this district, perhaps across the nation. I think it's very important that we send a person to Congress for this district in particular. Let's take the I-49 issue out of Miller County, Little River, and Sevier. It is my understanding that the local residents of Texarkana, Arkansas, and Texarkana, Texas, had worked together for a course of 3 years and come to a compromise on the loop for I-49. And I really believe that those citizens' work deserve much more respect than they got from my opponent. I really believe we need someone who would come to them and help to support and help them to get their ideas introduced into legislation instead of someone who would just come and intervene and just discount and throw away all of the work that they had invested into their plan. Now, and instead of just coming and saying this won't work and we can't do it that way, and then almost meeting them with resistance instead of in the spirit of cooperation. And as a result, what happened, as you know, the legislation was left there without any money, and the enabling legislation, as I understand it, was introduced by the congressman on the Texas side. The congressman on our side of the state would not give the guidance and the help necessary to get this done. And I'm trying to be this and say this in an expressive way so that people will understand that I believe it's important that we elect someone who will represent us to the fullest extent possible, who will join hands with us with regard to these very important economic development projects, instead of coming with new ideas that totally differ from what the community has worked on for such a long period of time. Now, there are other assets that this district has that perhaps this district has not maximized. Our rivers are great potentials for assets. The lakes in this district, great potential assets for us. Of course, we also have the fact that we are a large district, which all of us presently see as a negative, but I don't believe it has to be a negative anymore. I believe that we have to begin to identify with some leadership that will help us to see ourselves as one unit so that we can compete with the other regions of the state instead of having so many different regions within the district and spending so much time competing with one another.
Yes, ma'am. Do you support President Clinton's initiative to increase the child care tax for working families?
Yes, I really do. And I think it's important that we create as many opportunities as we can so that our parents can feel good about where their children are going early. But perhaps even more important than that, Dana, is that our children feel that they're in a school that will help in their development. And I think that this tax credit helps parents to be able to place their children in the best school that they can identify in their community.
Looking at the campaign, obviously it's going to be expensive. 26 counties, a lot of travel, you've got to get your message out there. A recent report in the Democrat Gazette showed about $60,000 that was reported by your campaign to almost $465,000 reported by Dickey's campaign. Wondering, is that going to be an obstacle to overcome, or is it going to be a grassroots effort where money won't be an issue?
Well, money is always an issue in these campaigns. However, I believe that our message, part of our message is that bank accounts don't vote, people do, but we do need money. And the report that you referred to, obviously, is a few weeks old. As you know, they change quite regularly, these reports. And there was one in the Camden News on Sunday. Actually, it's called the Triangle News on Sunday. Union County, Washington County, and Columbia County, where I'm sitting here. And actually, it reflects a much better picture for us. We have raised probably $3,000 less than my opponent has this year. Obviously, as the incumbent, he starts out with a war chest that we cannot start out with. And he is outspending me. Now, yes, I will rely heavily on a grassroots effort. Yes, we will raise more money. Yes, we are raising more money each day, and any citizen who wants to contribute could feel free to contact me.
Well, going one step further about campaign finances, and do you think maybe campaigns have become too expensive? And that takes us into another question about what's your view on the debate on campaign finance reform?
Yes, I really think that they are too expensive. I think it makes absolutely no sense to have to raise so much money in order to serve. Obviously, I'm in this business to serve people, and it should not have to cost more money than I've ever imagined in my life, but it does. In campaign finance reform, I think it's very important that we send people to Congress who stop just saying we need campaign finance reform, but perhaps we need to send someone who can really identify with how desperately we need meaningful campaign finance reform. And I think it's important that we send someone with a perspective that also is clear that full disclosure is important. Full and complete disclosure is important. And I do support the aspects of the present measures that are being discussed, where if any outside entity buys more than $25,000 or spends more than $25,000 on my campaign or anyone's campaign, I really believe that ought to be fully disclosed. And certainly, if anybody spends more than $100,000, there ought to be full disclosure. And of course, for someone like myself, and if someone were to spend $1,000 on my campaign, I think I ought to be willing to disclose that too. I think perhaps this is a good starting place. The Hutchinson bill that's being discussed right now is a great starting place. I don't know, I'm not as optimistic as he is perhaps about its passage, but I believe the last time my opponent and I debated, he said he didn't support it, but I would support any place to start with regard to campaign finance reform.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, I know money is a big deal anywhere these days, But do you think Congress should vote to increase minimum wage, especially to help families meet ends these days with prices rising?
Dana, that's a really nice question. In fact, I really believe it's important that we continue this debate on the minimum wage increase, and I think that the voters need to understand the most important thing, which is what I'm about to say. A mom and a dad today working minimum wage, which is $5.15, working full-time, their gross pay is $21,400. And we're talking about both parents working full-time. So imagine that they have 2 children. Imagine that they have 3 children. Imagine that they have 1 child. It is almost impossible to provide a basic livelihood for that family with that kind of money. So yes, we must continue the discussion on raising the minimum wage, and yes, I would support increasing the minimum wage.
Well, also going into pay and say equal pay. The Equal Pay Act was introduced in the 60s, and it was a legal means to end discrimination for women who were performing the same work with the same qualifications. And some contend that 35 years later, women are still getting paid far less than their male counterparts. If elected, would you support some measure that would end pay discrimination against women?
Absolutely, because I think, Amanda, that it's not only a point of contention, I think it's a reality that women are still working for less in almost every aspect or every respect or every profession. Women still do earn less. And I believe in some instances, women are pleased if they can report that they make 70% of what their male counterparts make. And I think it's ridiculous with a district like this, which is 54% women, to continue to send people to represent us in Congress who will continue to allow people to ignore this 35-year-old law. I think that the law must be strengthened, that it must have the teeth in it necessary for enforcement. 35 years is a long time to have a law of equal pay for women, and women are still struggling. And it's not just because so many of us are the heads of households, it's about having the same skills and the same education and the same level of experience.
Well, still on the topic of money, I know welfare is a big thing in Arkansas. And what would you plan to do to help people get off of welfare maybe? Or what would you plan to do with the welfare services?
Well, the first thing that we must do with regard to welfare reform in this great state of ours is to recognize the one great thing that Congress did was to give us full authority to implement welfare reform. That means this state can devise a plan by which it can do just about anything that is necessary to achieve this big, huge goal. The point is, this is a big, huge goal. And I think it's important, as I stated earlier, that we provide meaningful workforce development opportunities for the people that are on welfare and are wanting to get off of it. And I don't think that we are referring to the program correctly anymore, but I think today they're called TANF and T recipients, TANF, T-A-N-F. And I really believe it's important that we give them the guidelines necessary and the support necessary to get job training development, to, if they're going to be provided with community service opportunities, then it must be meaningful and adequate to lead to a skill that would lead to a job. Otherwise, we're wasting the time of the organization that is signing up to have these volunteers, and we're wasting the time of the person who's trying to get themselves off of this role of public assistance. I also believe the measure that I mentioned earlier is very important to create these opportunities for higher educational opportunities, transportation, et cetera, et cetera.
If you had one message, we're running a little short on time, and if you had one message to get across to the voters in the 4th District of Arkansas, what would that be?
That message is, I'm in this because I really believe in my heart that this is where I'm supposed to be, and I'm here because I really believe I'm responding to this higher calling, and I want to make life better for the children of Arkansas, for the working families of Arkansas, and the senior citizens. I really believe it's time that we send someone to represent us who not only understands the issues that are important to us, but is willing to do something about them.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of the special 98 campaign edition of the SAU Report. Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you.
The SAU Report is a production of broadcast journalism students in the Department of Theater and Mass Communication at Southern Arkansas University in Magnolia.